Welcome to Saturday Morning Classics. We are currently reading Manitou Blood by Graham Masterton. And if you remember last week, we left off with Ted Bush getting a psychic reading from Harry Erskine and finding out that his cards looked absolutely terrifying. This is Chapter 4, Blood on 17th Street. Imminent death? Ted blinked. What does that mean? Like I say, it's open to very wide interpretation, but basically it means that you're going to die, more or less imminently. You're putting me on. I lifted both hands to show him that I was helpless. What can I tell you? You wanted to know exactly what the cards predicted, and that's what the cards predict. Do they say how? I scanned the 27 cards that I had already turned up. Without going into too much detail, you've already met the person who's going to kill you. See here? That's you in the blindfold, talking to her. She's a woman, and you even know what her name is, although you don't know her real name, and never will. That's the significance of the blindfold. Wow. Do they say who she is? Not specifically, but she comes from very far away. Have you met any foreign women lately? Ted nodded. I met a girl at a party in Soho last weekend. She spoke pretty good English, but yes, she was foreign. Russian, maybe. Russian? Maybe. Russian type, anyhow. Well, maybe the cards are referring to her. They also tell me that you've been given a gift that you won't be able to get rid of, even if you want to. See this card here? The gift. A young man's holding a birdcage with a bright red parrot in it. He likes the parrot. He's smiling. But if you look closer, you can see that the bottom of the birdcage is actually fastened with bolts that go right through the palms of his hands. He can never put it down. Quite literally, he's screwed. Ted said, "She gave me a medallion. Look." He reached into his t-shirt and pulled out a heavy pewter amulet, about the same size as an Oreo. He held it out so that I could inspect it. The medallion had a man's face embossed on it, with a border of snakes and stars. The man's eyes were closed, and he looked almost laughably grim. On the back, an inscription was engraved in italics, but it was written in some language that I couldn't understand. De strigoica, de strigoi, sidekese ku moroi. This Russian-type girl, did she tell you what these words meant? Ted shook his head. She said it would bring me good luck, that's all. In that case, let's hope that she was right and the cards are wrong. Ted didn't look convinced. You said they were the most accurate fortune-telling cards that money could buy. That's true, I did say that, but they can be unnecessarily pessimistic. Like, they may say imminent death, but how imminent is imminent? If you're a Galapagos turtle, imminent could mean sometime early next century. I turned Ted's medallion over again, and it was then that I felt a crawling sensation up the back of my neck, like ants running into my hair. The man's eyes had opened, and he was staring straight at me and smiling. I flung the medallion away from me as if I had suddenly found a spider on it. Ted said, "What?" "Muscular spasm. Sorry, my fingers just jerk now and again. Ruined my career in Netsuke carving." Maybe I should have told him that the man's face on his lucky medallion had appeared to open his eyes, but it could have been a trick of the light, couldn't it? Or maybe the medallion had been made in such a way that it was supposed to do that. But Ted already looked so anxious that I thought it better if I said nothing. I may make a living out of telling fortunes, but I can assure you that finding out what the future has in store for us does nobody any good, especially since we can't do a damn thing about it, not even with bloodroot. Let's turn over the last card, shall we? I suggested. This is what we call the decider card, the card that finally tells you what's going to happen to you. Supposing this decider card says imminent death, too? No problem. We can always tell your fortune again with a different deck of cards, maybe the tarot or the gypsy cards, or we could even try the crystal ball. You have to understand, Ted, the future, well, the future is only a matter of opinion. Ted kept his eyes shut while I turned over the last card. I was hoping to God that it wasn't the serpent, which means certain death before the next moon rises, but it was almost as bad. It was the water woman, a picture of a woman floating just below the surface of a river with undulating green weed instead of hair. I had never turned this card up before, but I knew what it signified: death by drowning, or some other unpleasant demise that involved water. Ted opened his eyes and frowned at it. The water woman? Is that bad? Well, it's not bad, but I have to be frank. It's not especially good either. Don't let it worry you, though. The cards are warning you rather than telling you. They're saying, be careful, Ted. Be careful of what? Just be careful. Don't go swimming. Don't accept gifts from damp-looking women. And look both ways before you step in front of a fish truck. That's the message they're giving you about imminent death. You're not going to die tomorrow, so long as you keep your wits about you. I started gathering up the cards. Is that it? Said Ted. What about my nightmare? Oh, yeah, your nightmare. That's why I came to see you, man, to see if you could stop the nightmare. Of course, but quite frankly, I don't think your nightmare is anything for you to worry about. You're suffering from stress, is all. Stress? Sure. You may think that everything in your life is hunky-dory, but you've taken on a whole lot of new responsibilities, haven't you? So you're subconsciously beginning to feel that things are getting on top of you, hence the box you're trapped in, and all of the boxes piled on top of you. I can let you have some snakeweed for that. Put snakeweed powder under your pillow, and you'll never dream about yourself again. Guaranteed. Ted said, Amelia said that you could maybe call on your spirit guide to tell me what was wrong. I stopped picking up cards. My spirit guide? She said you had a Native American spirit guide, some medicine man you once used to know, who got killed. Amelia told you about that? Sure. She said that you had a real talent when it came to telling fortunes, but you hardly ever used it. Oh, really? Did I just read your cards for you, or did I imagine it? Well, yes, you did, but Amelia said if you got in touch with your spirit guide, you could actually show me what was going to happen to me. She said that, too? I thought for a moment. Then I dug into the pocket of my jeans and took out his $100 bill. Ted, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you a full refund, no questions asked. But I don't want a refund, man. I want to find out what my nightmare is all about. Amelia said you could do it. I can't sleep. I haven't slept in over a week. It's driving me out of my skull. Why do you think Amelia didn't want to help you? It's unpredictable. It's dangerous. Sure, I contact my spirit guide. Sure, I can show you what your nightmare is all about. I can also stick a .45 up my butt and pull the trigger, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it. Ted lowered his head and stared at the table. He sat like that for so long, I was beginning to think that he had fallen asleep. "Listen," I said, "I haven't done that kind of thing in a very long time. You should try the snakeweed. I can let you have a teaspoonful for $45. That's a genuine bargain." Still, he kept his head down. "Contacting dead people, it's a very risky business. Amelia will tell you how risky it is, and she was doing it for years. Why do you think she doesn't do it now?" I stood up and went to the window. The blonde woman outside with the roots was still there. I thought about what I could say to her. "I couldn't help noticing you," I could say to her. "The way that the cigarette smoke leaks out of your mouth and disappears up that cute little nose of yours. No, that wouldn't work either." Ted said, "I don't know what else to do, man. I went to my doctor, but he said the same as you, stress, and put me on Ativan. I took them, but they only made the nightmare worse. Shit, man, I'm too scared even to turn out the lights." "I can't help you, Ted. I'm sorry." He looked up and I was shocked to see that his face was smothered in tears. "You have to, man. There's nobody else. Please." The blonde woman looked up and saw me staring at her. I smiled and winked, but she turned her back on me and went inside her store. Oh, well. I didn't know what to do. I hate disturbing the dead, and if Amelia hadn't sent him, I would have told Ted to forget it. "I'm really not sure, Ted," I said. "I guess I could ask my spirit guide if he can help you, but I can't give you any guarantees, and if it looks too risky, please, please, man, you don't know what this means." I hesitated. I really didn't like this at all. I had made contact with the so-called spirit world only 3 or 4 times in the past, but each time it had been a catastrophe, and I had been lucky to escape with my life. You think dead people are docile? You think they all go off to rapture and spend their time dancing in meadows and playing the ukulele like a bunch of hippies? Ha! Dead people are bitter and twisted and vindictive, and they hate the living like you wouldn't believe. Put it this way, if you were dead, how would you feel about all those smug bastards who were still alive, especially if they kept getting in touch with you and saying, "Hello, hello, is anyone there? What's it like being dead? Where did you hide the U.S. Steel stock certificates?" "Just hold on a moment," I told Ted. I pulled out the bottom drawer of my cabinet and took out my address book. I found Amelia's number and punched it out on my cell phone. It rang and rang, but all I got was her answering machine. "I'm not here right now, but I really want to know why you called me." Amelia. That same husky voice. I cleared my throat and then I said, "Amelia, it's Harry. I have young Ted with me, Ted Bush, like in Anheuser. I'm going to do what I can to help him, but I'd like to know what you think about this nightmare he's been having." I looked at Ted, who was biting his thumbnail, and then I said, "Call me back, can you? Love you." I snapped the phone shut. "Okay then, Teddy boy, let's see if I can get you some assistance from the world beyond." I tugged the drapes together so that the room was dark, except for a few sharp chinks of light that shone around the edges. I took 3 church candles from the kitchen drawer and lit them. Then I took off the black bead bracelet that I always wore, the bracelet that Singing Rock had given me, and dropped it around the candles so that it encircled them. "You see this?" I said to Ted. "This bracelet is made out of polished stones from the Okobojo riverbed in South Dakota. The guy who gave it to me said that when he died, his soul would be divided into 21 parts, and that each of these beads would contain one of those parts. The things he had seen, the things he had said, the things he had tasted, the things he had touched, and so on. This bracelet is like a recording of who he was. Ted said, "I'll try anything, man. I really will." "Okay, then." I reached across the table and held both of Ted's hands. "I want you to close your eyes and think of your nightmare. I want you to imagine it as clearly as you can. The box, the weight on top of you, the ship tilting up and down." Ted nodded. I waited for a while, but he kept on nodding. "Close your eyes, then," I told him. "I'd like to get started sometime this week, if I can." "Oh, sure, sorry." Ted closed his eyes and at the same time gripped my hands even tighter. I sat there for a while, watching his face. It's extraordinary how much people reveal of their thoughts when they have closed their eyes. Even more when they're asleep. Myself, I tried to think of Singing Rock the very last time that I had seen him, turning toward me, just about to say something. He hadn't looked much like a Cheyenne medicine man, short, stocky, with a broad, good-humored face and glasses. You would have thought he was an Eastern European mattress salesman rather than one of the most powerful workers of Native American magic since Hestin Claw. "Singing Rock," I said, "I need to talk to you." A car honked its horn in the street outside, and somebody started shouting, "You stupid? What are you, stupid or what?" "Singing Rock, I have a troubled young man here, and I need your guidance to help him." The candle flames flickered and dipped, but I didn't feel that there was any presence here, apart from me and Ted, holding hands. I couldn't hear anything, either, apart from the commotion down in the street and the endless taka-taka-taka of my air conditioner. "Singing Rock, this young man has been having terrible nightmares, and he needs to understand what they mean and how he can stop them." I thought to myself, this is hopeless. Ted and I are going to sit here with our hands becoming increasingly sweaty, and nothing is going to happen. Singing Rock had probably been dead for far too long for me to be able to call him back, or else he simply didn't feel like helping an insomniac paleface. We had been friends, Singing Rock and I, but he had never been a lover of white men as a race. His great-great-grandmother had been killed by the U.S. Cavalry at Whitestone Hill in Dakota Territory, along with 5 more of his family, only babies at the time, and over 200 other men, women, and children of the Yanktonai and Hunkpatina Sioux. Singing Rock used to talk about it with such rage that you would have gotten the impression that it had happened only a few days before, instead of in 1863. Time isn't always the great healer, believe me, especially when it comes to great injustices. Singing Rock, I'm asking you a favor here. I need you to open some doors for me and show me the way through. Ted opened one of his eyes. "Do you really think this is going to work?" he asked me dubiously. "Not if you keep peeking, it isn't. Keep thinking about your nightmare, okay?" He closed his eyes again and squeezed his face in concentration. "Singing Rock," I intoned, "I think that something seriously bad could be happening here, and I really need your help." I waited and waited, and I really began to believe that Singing Rock was going to ignore me. Why should he help me, after all? If I hadn't meddled in Native American magic, he would probably still be alive today. But just as I was about to twist my hands free from Ted's sweaty grip, I heard something, and it wasn't the traffic, or the air conditioning unit, or the binky-bonky drums of the World Music Store across the street. It was a very high-pitched keening sound, like metal scraping on metal, so high that it was almost inaudible to the human ear, although it probably would have set the dogs howling. Singing Rock? I peered slowly around the room. Nothing appeared to have changed, but there was no doubt about it. There was somebody else here. The balance of the room felt as if it had shifted. Things appeared to have moved, even though they hadn't. The books looked as if they had rearranged themselves, and the photograph of Karen and Lucy that hung on the wall in the corner had slightly tilted. Singing Rock, are you here? The keening sound grew louder, so loud that it began to set my teeth on edge. Now I could hear another sound, too, a soft, insistent chanting, and the tapping of sticks. I thought I could smell smoke, too, and hear the wind rustling through the slippery grass. Singing Rock was here, or not very far away, anyhow. I was sure of it. Ted, I told him, I think my spirit guide has arrived. What do you want me to do, man? Think of your nightmare as clearly as you can. See it in your mind's eye. Show him how claustrophobic you feel trapped inside that box. Show him how the ocean's going up and down. Let him hear that young boy's voice. I can see it, man. I can feel it. I can hear it. The tapping of sticks became quicker and more staccato. I could definitely hear somebody chanting now. I didn't know what dialect it was, but it was definitely Native American, and I would have taken a guess that it was Sioux. Singing Rock, this young man is deeply troubled by his dream. He needs you to show him what it means, and who could be causing it, and why. Singing Rock didn't answer, but the black bead bracelet started to shake as if it were a rattlesnake's tail. Show him how he can rid himself of this dream and sleep peacefully again. The bracelet shook even more violently, and the candles began to splutter and to burn more fiercely. What's happening? Said Ted. Keep your eyes closed. Concentrate on your nightmare. He's here now. Show him what's been scaring you. Oh, man, this is worse than when I'm asleep. Concentrate. He needs to see your nightmare as clearly as you do. Ted gritted his teeth, and perspiration was dripping from the end of his nose. The bracelet continued to rattle, and the candle flames burned so furiously now that they were crackling and spitting out sparks. I felt as if the whole room was rushing through time and space, completely out of my control. It was like being on a fairground ride when you're nauseated and desperate to get off, but it just goes on and on and on. Singing Rock! At that moment, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blurred figure disappear into my bedroom door. It was tall, and it was dark, and strangely stretched out, but it disappeared so quickly and jerkily that I couldn't see who it was. What really scared me, though, was that the door was closed and that the figure hadn't opened it. It had vanished straight through the brown-stained wood. I wrenched my hands away from Ted's and awkwardly stood up so that my chair fell back onto the floor with a sharp bang. Ted opened his eyes and blinked. What? I think he's here, I told him. Even I was excited. I circled around the table, straining my ears. You think who's here? Whoever's been causing your nightmare. Singing Rock has managed to bring him here so that you can see him for yourself. I don't get it. It's simple. Nightmares are always caused by spirit activity of one kind or another. When you have a bad dream, that's always caused by a dead person disturbing your sleep. Most of the time they don't do it deliberately, but sometimes they really want to scare the shit out of you. I paused, still listening. Then I said, The only way you can find out which spirit is giving you nightmares is by asking a spirit guide to show you who it is. And that's who's here? You got it. Ted looked warily from side to side. So where is he? I don't see nobody. He's in there, I said, and pointed toward the bedroom. In there? How the hell did he get in there? The bracelet gave a sharp, impatient rattle. It had probably cost Singing Rock an exhausting amount of spiritual energy to find out who was responsible for Ted's nightmares and to bring him here. It had probably been highly dangerous, too. A spirit who could create the illusion of a suffocating box and a fully laden ship at sea was obviously not to be messed with. Follow me, I said, and beckoned Ted across to the bedroom door. I pressed my ear against one of the panels and listened. At first the room seemed to be silent, but then I heard the softest of whispers, hundreds of whispers, no, thousands, like a whole cathedral filled with fervently whispering nuns. Tetal nostru, curelli este incurui, se fintiesque se numile toi. I reached for the old brown plastic doorknob. There was only one way to find out what the spirit looked like, and that was to face it. But I can tell you that my heart was thumping so hard against my ribs that it hurt. Vi imperatiato, facesse toi. No, said Ted, hysterically, in a just broken voice like a teenager. Ted, he's here, but Singing Rock can't keep him here for very long. I don't want to see him. He was almost screaming. Please, man, I can feel how evil he is. I don't want to see him. On the table, the beads gave another brisk rattle. This is your only chance, Ted. If you don't face up to him now, you could go on having this same nightmare for the rest of your life. Ted, listen to me, Ted. But Ted was backing away from me with both of his hands raised, shaking his head violently from side to side. I can't do it, dude. I can't face him. I can feel how evil he is. I never felt anything so bad. Ted, you must. You don't have any choice. I didn't want to open that bedroom door any more than Ted. It sounded as if the whisperers were growing ever more numerous, as if there were millions of ghostly spirits crowding against the other side of the paneling, praying hungrily for their release. And there was a smell, too, a really sickening smell, like cheap chicken meat with the first shadow of olive green decay showing through the skin, and drains clogged with dripping gray hair and lumpy milk. All the same, I knew that we had to confront this spirit that Singing Rock had brought to show me. If we didn't, I might never be able to call on him again. A Sioux would give you everything he possessed if you asked him, or even if you didn't, but he would never forgive ingratitude. I'm opening the door, Ted, I told him. You have to see this, no matter what. Ted dropped onto his knees. I can't, please. I heard a furious pattering against the other side of the door, like a shower of locusts. On the table, however, the bracelet gave a single desultory shake, and then lay silent, and the candles began to dip and gutter as if they were starved of air. I knew that if I didn't look in the bedroom now, I would never know who was giving Ted his nightmares or why, and that he would probably end up gibbering mad or suicidal or both. So I opened the door. Chapter 5. City of Blood. Can we talk to her? Asked Lieutenant Roberts, nodding towards Susan Fireman's bed. His voice was extremely deep and resonant, as if he were hiding a double bass inside his suit, and Frank detected a southern accent, South Carolina or Georgia. "Not yet," said Frank. "I don't think you'd get a whole lot of sense out of her in any case." "She spoke to you, though, right?" A pale and pimply young nun was hovering close by, trying hard to look as if she wasn't listening. Frank said, "I think you gentlemen had better come up to my office. You sent somebody around to her apartment, I presume." "Oh, you bet," said Lieutenant Roberts. "They'll contact me just as soon as they've checked it out." They went up to the 27th floor in silence. There was nobody else in the elevator except for a diminutive Korean nurse in huge white sneakers who kept yawning, which made Detective Mancini start yawning too. Frank ushered them inside his office and closed the door. "You want to sit down?" he asked them. "Not especially," said Lieutenant Roberts. He was tall and grave, more like a preacher than a detective. He was not only wearing a black linen suit, but a black silk shirt with a black silk necktie and very shiny black patent shoes. Frank said, "Miss Fireman was partly delirious, so I can't vouch for the veracity of what she told me." "You're not on the witness stand, Doc. Just tell me what she said." "She shares her apartment with a young woman called Prissy and a young man called Michael. She told me, well, she said that she cut their throats with a kitchen knife and then drank their blood directly from their severed arteries." There was a very long silence, so long that Frank began to wonder if Lieutenant Roberts had heard what he had just said. But at last Lieutenant Roberts took out a very white handkerchief, unfolded it, and blew his nose, and, to his credit, didn't inspect it. "Is there any reason for you to suspect that she might be making it up?" "As I say, I can't be 100% sure, but the blood that she vomited was human, and it wasn't hers, and the amount she vomited is consistent with what she's been telling me." "There's no chance that either of her victims might have survived?" "Very unlikely. The average person has about 5.5 liters of blood, and if they lose more than 20% of it..." Detective Mancini's cell phone warbled like a homing pigeon. "Riker?" he said. "Okay, just a minute. I can't hear you. You're breaking up." He turned to Lieutenant Roberts and said, "It's Riker. I'll have to take it outside." He left the office and went out into the corridor, closing the door behind him, although Frank could still hear him shouting to make himself heard. "You're in there? You're in there now?" "What do you mean nobody's answering? They're supposed to be dead, you moron!" Lieutenant Roberts was silent for a moment, as if he were thinking about something completely different. Then he said, "What is actually wrong with Ms. Fireman?" Frank shrugged. "Physically, several things. She's anemic, her blood pressure is way down, and she's also hypersensitive to light. That's why the blinds in her room are all pulled down." "So she's suffering from what exactly? Does it have a name?" "Well, quite frankly, we don't know. We're carrying out further tests, but until we get the results, we're pretty much guessing. She's carrying some kind of unusual enzyme in her blood, but we haven't yet identified it." "Is there any known disease that makes people want to drink human blood?" "No, but having said that, there might be some delusional psychoses which lead the sufferer to believe that they need to." "So Miss Fireman is a nut job?" "Well, nut job isn't a term we generally use here at the Sisters of Jerusalem, Lieutenant. For one thing, it's not clinically specific. There are scores of different types of nut jobs, from bipolar depressives to full-blown sociopaths. And as I say, we haven't yet completed all of our tests." "Did she tell you why she drank the blood?" She said that the sunlight in her apartment made her feel as if she was burning, and she had to drink her friend's blood to save herself from being cremated alive. It's possible that the burning sensation was a genuine physical symptom, but her response to it was psychotic. It happens. I once had a patient with stomach cancer who seriously believed that he was being eaten from the inside out by alien insects and tried to swallow Raid to kill them. When people suffer unbearable pain, well, it can seriously distort their perception of reality. Okay, accepted, said Lieutenant Roberts. But what I'm trying to ask you is, do you consider that she's mentally competent? Do you think she can tell the difference between right and wrong? The phone buzzed. Frank said, "Excuse me for a moment," and picked up the receiver. He listened and nodded, and then he slowly put the receiver down again and kept his hand pressed on top of it, as if he were trying to make sure that it didn't ring again. "We have a problem, Lieutenant." "A new problem? Or the same problem got worse?" "I don't know. Maybe both. About an hour ago, a young man was brought into the emergency room, vomiting blood like Ms. Fireman. He showed some signs of being sensitive to light, too. His skin was all covered in sunblock. We analyzed the contents of his stomach, and I've just been given the preliminary results." "And?" "Over 3 liters of blood, none of it his." "And that's not all. Dr. Garrett has just had another one brought in, a middle-aged male, also vomiting blood, his face and his hands covered in thick foundation cream." "Another one? Maybe it's some kind of blood-drinking cult." "There's no way of telling what it is, not yet. It could be a virus, incubated by the heat and the high humidity, or maybe it's not a physical sickness at all. Maybe it's some kind of mass hysteria." "You think it could be catching?" "There's no way of telling, not yet. We're carrying out all the regulation disease control protocols in case it is." Detective Mancini shouted, "Okay, Riker, for sure. I'll talk to you later." He pushed his way back in through the door, catching his foot on the wastepaper basket. "Well?" asked Lieutenant Roberts. "Right on the button, Lieutenant. They found them in the kitchen, 2 dead, a man and a woman, both in their 20s, both with their throats cut, both bled out." He checked his notebook and sniffed. "Mr. Michael Harris and Miss Priscilla Truman." "Oh, my God," said Frank. In spite of her confession, in spite of all the medical evidence, it still came as a shock to him that Susan Fireman's story was true. He felt as if the lights had suddenly gone up in the middle of a horror movie, and he had found himself spattered in real, warm blood. "Well," said Lieutenant Roberts, "it looks like we have ourselves a double homicide, and that's just for starters." He checked his large rotary watch. "Since Miss Fireman isn't in a fit state to be interviewed, I think we'll go take a look at her handiwork for ourselves and come back later, if that's convenient with you. I'll also need to interview those other 2 patients of yours down in emergency. Ask them whose blood they've been drinking." "Of course," said Frank. "However you want to do it." He felt suddenly very cold and watery, and he dragged out his tan leather chair and sat down. "I'll call you, shall I, if Susan Fireman shows any signs of coming around?" Lieutenant Roberts stopped, unbalanced, and frowned at him. "Are you okay, Doc? You're looking kind of queasy." "I'm fine. Just a little shocked, I guess." "Well, that's understandable. You take it easy. We can see ourselves down to the emergency room." "Well, Lieutenant, before you go—" "Yes, Doc, what is it?" "I don't know. Maybe this isn't important. But Susan Fireman was talking in some foreign language, nothing that I've ever heard before. Eastern European, maybe, by the sound of it. But the young man they brought in, he was talking the same language. Really? Tattle nostru, something like that, but there was a whole lot more of it. Lieutenant Roberts raised both eyebrows. Tattle nostru? Doesn't mean anything to me. Still, he said, tugging out his notebook and jotting it down. Tattle nostru. I'm glad he remembered it. You never know. Dr. Garrett and I thought that maybe there might be some kind of connection between them. You know, maybe they're terrorists or something. Well, sure, it's worth bearing in mind. They could be Al-Qaeda, trying to spread this disease deliberately, like anthrax. On the other hand, like you say, maybe it isn't a disease at all, and maybe they simply belong to the same Esperanto club. Maybe it's the heat, and everybody's gone bananas and developed a raging thirst for rhesus negative instead of Coke. Until we find out what the hell's going on, we don't know what the hell's going on. The phone buzzed again. This time, Frank flicked the intercom button so that Lieutenant Roberts could hear it, too. Frank, it's Dean Garrett again. Ambulance Battalion 8 has just called in to say they're bringing us 3 more people barfing up blood, and they warn us that we might have to expect more. Apparently, NYU downtown has reported 5 similar cases. St. Luke's has 3, and Lenox Hill has 2. Frank said, "Oh my God, this is turning into an epidemic." "Either that or a massacre," said Lieutenant Roberts, "or both. Let's think about it. If all of these folks have been drinking human blood, how many throats have they cut to get it?" Detective Mancini's phone warbled again. "It's a message from Inspector Conroy, Lieutenant. He wants us back at the precinct. Urgent." "Okay, Doc," said Lieutenant Roberts. "It looks like we'll have to love you and leave you." Frank said, "Sure. You still want me to call you about Susan Fireman?" "Oh, yes, I got this very voodoo premonition. I think that you and me, we're going to be sorely in need of each other's help in the next few days." Frank drank a glass of water, and then he went back down to see Susan. Her skin looked even more luminous than it had before, and when he approached her bed, she could smile only very weakly. "Who are those men?" she asked him. "The police. They've sent some detectives to your apartment. They found your friends." "I see." Frank cleared his throat. "They'll want to talk to you when you're well enough." "What time is it? I've been asleep." 2:35. Why don't you try to sleep some more? The best thing you can do is rest." Susan shook her head. "I can't. I keep having that dream." Frank stood beside her bed for a while, saying nothing. "I'm in trouble, aren't I?" asked Susan. "Well, yeah, if it was you who killed Prissy and Michael, then yes." "It won't matter. They can't convict dead people, can they?" "What do you mean? You're not going to die." "I'm not going to live, either." Frank looked at her for a few moments longer, and then he said, "I have to go. There's a hell of a crisis going on downstairs." "You don't hate me, do you? For killing Prissy and Michael?" "It's not my job to hate my patients, no matter what they've done." "Well, I'm glad about that. The funny thing is, I don't hate myself either. At least they died doing something useful, didn't they? Which is more than most people can say." "Susan," said Frank, "have you ever heard of the Pale Ones?" Susan shook her head. "No," she said. "No, I never have." "You sure about that? A man who was watching you this morning, he said that you were one of the Pale Ones. He said he couldn't explain it to me because I wouldn't understand what he meant." I never heard of them. Never. I promise you. I never heard of them. Susan's voice was suddenly different, rambling and blurred, as if she were concussed or talking in her sleep. I promise you. I really promise you. She kept on shaking her head, but as she did so, her eyes kept rolling up. Susan, said Frank. He glanced up at her monitor, but her heartbeat was steady and her blood pressure was constant, even if it was still very low. Her eyes were closed now, and she was breathing soft and steady. He waited a little longer, and then he left the room and walked along the corridor toward the elevators. He had almost reached them when he had the unnerving sensation that Susan had climbed out of bed and was following close behind him in her white hospital gown. He stopped and turned around, but the only person in the corridor apart from him was a cleaner mopping the floor and singing Lazy River. He pushed the button for down. As he waited for the elevator to arrive, he kept glancing back toward room 1566. A nurse went in and then came out again. He felt distinctly unnerved. He was sure that Susan had been only inches behind his back. You're not going to die, he had assured her. But what had she said in reply? I'm not going to live either. What the hell did she mean by that? Either you live or you die. You can't do both. The elevator pinged and the doors opened up. A man was standing inside, his head wrapped up in white bandages so that his eyes and his mouth were nothing but slits, like a mummy. Maybe you can do both. Frank took a deep breath and stepped inside. When he stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, the emergency department was already in chaos. He found Dean helping a young woman in a lime green summer dress who was vomiting blood all over the gurney and all over the floor. "Oh my God," she kept mumbling. "Oh my God." Then her throat constricted and another gush of blood came up. Dean was doing his best to catch it all in a pressed cardboard kidney bowl, but there were pints of it. He was unshaven and sweaty, and his hair stuck up like Stan Laurel's. "You look like shit," Frank told him. "You're about the 10th person to tell me that," said Dean. "Are they going to give you some more help?" "Oh, sure. They're bringing them in from all over. Kieran Kelly's come down from intensive care, and Bill Medovic's coming back from White Plains, and I'm supposed to be getting 5 more technicians and 7 more nurses, but if it carries on like this, I'm going to be swamped." "Have you heard from the death toll?" "Not yet, but Kieran said that if the casualty numbers go over 50, he's going to declare an emergency code red." The young woman sat up and retched, but this time she brought up only a few splatters of blood. When Dean had wiped her mouth, Frank leaned over and said, "Miss, my name's Dr. Winter. Can you tell me your name?" Kathleen Williams. Oh my God, I'm burning all over." "You feel like your skin's on fire?" "I'm burning. Help me." "We're going to do everything we can for you, Kathleen, I promise you, but I need to know whose blood you've been drinking." "What?" she said, staring at him in horror. "Frank," Dean protested, "you can't ask her a question like that." "You drank somebody's blood, Kathleen," Frank persisted. "You have to tell me whose blood it was." "I didn't drink anybody's blood. I'm sick. That's all." "Listen," said Frank. "I know what you did. Do you hear me? I know what you did. This isn't your own blood, is it?" "Leave me alone. I'm hurting. I can't bear it. I'm hurting so bad." "You'll be hurting even more if we refuse to give you treatment." You can't do that. I'm burning up. Doctor, please help me. I'm burning up. Frank, for God's sake, hissed Dean, looking around to make sure that there weren't any witnesses. We could be sued from here to next Hanukkah. But Frank stayed where he was, and when a nurse came to push the gurney away, he said, "No, wait. Kathleen has something she wants to tell us." The young woman opened her mouth and closed it again, and then she moaned and said, "All right, I did drink their blood." "Whose blood? Come on, Kathleen. You have to tell me." The young woman's eyes suddenly overflowed with tears, and her mouth was turned downward by grief. "My children, my 2 little children. I couldn't stop myself." "Holy Mother of Hamsters," said Dean, pushing his fingers through his mussed-up hair. "What did you do?" Frank pressed her. "I can't tell you. It wasn't me. I would never hurt them, ever." "Tell me what you did, Kathleen. It's the only way we can help you." I was burning. I was burning up all morning. I couldn't stand it. I felt like my skin was shriveling up. It was so hot. I kept thinking about their little hearts beating and all that blood in their bodies. I kept thinking that it would cool me down. Dean covered his face with both hands, but Frank persisted. "How did it happen, Kathleen? Come on. If you don't tell me, you'll have to tell the police." "Well, I was making their lunch, cutting sandwiches for them. But all the time I felt like I was on fire. I pulled all the blinds down to keep the sunshine out, but I was still burning. Then Marty came into the kitchen and asked me why it was so dark. I looked at him and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stop myself." "How old is Marty?" 11. And Melissa, she's 9. When I was finished with Marty, I went through to my bedroom. She was sitting in front of my dressing table mirror, playing with my lipstick. She saw me in the mirror and she thought I was angry with her, but I wasn't angry with her. I was still burning up and I needed her blood." "So you cut her throat?" The young woman swallowed and nodded. "I'm going to hell for this, aren't I?" "Hell?" said Frank. Then under his breath, "You'll be lucky if they let you in." Dean led Frank out into the corridor. "They're murderers, aren't they? All of these people." Frank said, "Yes, it looks like it." "God Almighty, we've got more than 30 of them now, and they're still coming in." "We can't judge them, Dean. That's for the courts to decide, not us." "Well, that's if they survive. Some of the early ones are in pretty bad way." "Let me take a look." Dean led him across to the pediatric crisis ward, which he had set aside for hemorrhage cases only. A large red-lettered notice warned, "Quarantine area, keep out." "Just a precaution," Dean told him. "There's no evidence at all that this is contagious or infectious, or that it's caused by any kind of toxin." Inside the ward, all the blinds had been drawn down tight, so that the physician assistants and emergency nurses were working in twilight like pale green ghosts. Frank walked up and down the aisle, stopping to examine each patient in turn. Some of them lay silent and white-faced, as if they were sleeping or already dead, but some of the newer admissions were crying and screaming and retching and begging for mercy. The stench of partially digested blood was so thick and fetid that Frank could taste it in his mouth. All the time the sirens kept whooping as more people were brought in from the sweltering city outside, and the plastic doors kept flapping open, and gurneys rattled along the corridors, and paramedics shouted for assistance. Frank and Dean went back into the emergency room and tugged off their masks. "Anything new from Willie?" asked Frank. The vinyl-tiled floor was sticky with blood, so that the soles of his shoes made a scrunching sound. He's been testing for everything you can think of, from sarin to ricin to mustard gas. He's testing for anthrax, cholera, chicken flu, 3 kinds of plague, and you name it. Nothing so far, but he hasn't given up, and he's still screening samples from every patient we bring in. How about the enzyme? Nothing conclusive, not yet, but it's a metallozyme, apparently, with a silver component. He has some idea that it might be related to the aging process, but he'll have to do some more work on it. As he reached the doors, Dr. Pellman came in, accompanied by his deputy medical director, Ingrid Kurtz, both of them looking grim-faced. "The mayor's declared a state of emergency," said Dr. Pellman. "Up until 15 minutes ago, there were 370 reported cases of people vomiting blood citywide, and so far the police have found 93 dead bodies with their throats sliced open." "Oh my God," said Frank. "This is beginning to sound like Dawn of the Dead." Dr. Pellman said, "You can forget about the legal niceties, Dr. Winter. We urgently need to find out what's wrong with these people. We need to know what they have in common, what they've eaten, where they've been, who they've had any kind of contact with. We need to pinpoint where each of them lived and where they were when they started to show signs of sickness. The CDC is sending us 2 senior advisors, and I've also been talking to MedCom. You call in as many of your own staff as you need. All leave is canceled until we've got this situation under control." "Yes, sir." "And Dr. Garrett?" "Yes, sir." "As soon as you can, take a couple of hours off. Take a shower and get yourself something to eat. You look like shit." As Frank returned to the 11th floor, he could see that the scale of the panic was rising by the minute. Every time the elevator doors opened, more and more people pushed their way in. Crowds of non-critical patients were being moved in wheelchairs to the convalescent wards, anxiously clutching their belongings on their knees, while technicians and nurses hurried along the corridors, and telephones warbled urgently at every nurse's station. In the space of only a few minutes, the hospital had turned into a noisy, crowded, chillingly air-conditioned babao. He was only halfway along the corridor to room 1566 when his beeper went. He took it out of his pocket and looked at it, and then broke into a run. He arrived in the doorway at the same time one of the emergency technicians was coming out, and they almost collided. "What's happened?" he demanded. "She's asystolic. She's asystolic. No warning." Frank peered past the technician into the darkened room. 3 nurses were gathered around the bed, and Susan Fireman's nightgown had been dragged up to expose her sparrow-like chest. One of the nurses was already holding up the bright yellow defibrillator paddles and shouting, "Clear!" But for some reason, Frank knew for certain that Susan Fireman's soul had already left her body. He stepped into the room. He felt as if he were walking in slow motion while the crash team was rushing around the bed in a speeded-up frenzy of activity. They shocked her and shocked her and shocked her again, but her face remained deathly white, and her skinny wrists flopped like a doll's, and she showed no signs at all that they might be able to save her. He waited in the shadows with his hand pressed over his mouth. There was nothing else he could do. In the end, the emergency nurse backed away from the bed and returned the paddles to the crash cart. "Sorry, folks, we've lost her." Frank stepped forward and stood at the end of the bed. "Sorry, Dr. Winter," said the nurse. "We did everything we could." "Her heart just stopped," said another nurse, popping his fingers. "1 second, all her stats were looking pretty steady. The next second, snap, flatline." Frank looked down at Susan Fireman, and he was surprised to feel so upset. Usually, when his patients died, he felt nothing more than a professional regret that he hadn't been able to give them longer to live. But only a few hours ago, Susan Fireman had been contorting herself outside Macy's and climbing a ladder that wasn't there, and he hadn't had the chance to ask her what she was doing and what she was trying to say, and he realized now that he had really wanted to know. In spite of her waxy pallor, however, Susan Fireman looked completely composed, and he could almost have sworn that she was smiling to herself. "Do we know how to get in touch with her family?" asked one of the nurses. "Yes," said Frank. "You'd better go. You'll be needed in the emergency room. All of you." The nurses packed away their equipment and unfastened her drips, and at last he was left alone with her. He studied her face under the lamplight and thought, "I wonder what really happened to you, Susan Fireman." It occurred to him that he was probably going to find out within the next few hours if more and more people died of the same condition. But whatever had taken her, she had been a strikingly attractive young girl, and this was a very sordid ending to a very short life. "When you were climbing that ladder," he asked her, "where were you going? Where did you think that was going to take you to?" Without warning, she opened her eyes, those pale ice blue eyes, and stared at him. Well, thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of Manitou Blood. And until next time, have a great week, everyone.